Talked before the episode, and you are a therapist.
Yes. Well, I was trained, allegedly, or legally speaking. I do have my master's in counseling psychology, so I did train as a marriage and family therapist, and I interned as that for a while, but I decided to go a different direction because you have a bit of, what do I want to say? There are limitations to regular psychotherapy, and I very much work. Also, therapy was created by old white dudes, and so it doesn't really encompass a lot of maybe the cultural aspects and the just situational experiences we have. It can be kind of if you feel like this, then you're fucked up, and that's your problem kind of thing. So I decided to go more towards holistic coaching. I think the word coach is a little tough for me to embrace as well. So I just say I'm a mental health practitioner. But basically what I do is a version of therapy. Legally, I can't say that. I say it's therapeutic.
Got it.
So
But
if
you,
that makes
you,
sense.
you do have a master's in counseling.
Yes, I have my master's in expressive art therapy and counseling psychology.
So that's not
exactly.
enough to become a
You-
licensed therapist.
Well, in order to be licensed, especially in the state of California, you have to have, I believe it's 3,000 hours of supervision. But I did start that path, and I even still now have a supervisor I consult with if I feel like I need support. Because even, I'm young, and I've been doing this, 5 years? I don't know everything. And humans, we're so nuanced, and the kind of support that we need and can offer, it varies. So I still receive consultation, which I love to do. I love to learn. But yeah, to be a licensed therapist, you have to get 3,000 hours and you have to sit for certain tests and pass that. And then even after that, which I think is cool, is you have to do continuing education. They need to see that you are keeping up on whatever trends are coming up and stuff like that. So you have to have, I think it's a few hours of continuing education units. And
Got it, practicing,
Yeah.
theory and also practicals that you
Yes.
have to do.
Yeah, and because it's science and we're humans and we're always studying and learning, there's more information that comes out. So what's really hip right now, right, is trauma and neurobiology, neuroscience. That's really a trend that's come in the last 20-ish years. So, we used to really blame the person for whatever reaction they had. With Freud, it was all about the mother, your mother wounds. And so as we've learned, psychology is quite a new field as a Western paradigm.
Right.
But healing, shamanic work, going into our inner space, that's always existed.
Yeah, it's been there.
Consciousness. Yeah, consciousness, which is perfect because it's kind of slides us into psychedelic use is also been happening forever. But
Right.
It's getting popular right now.
Before we get into psychedelics, I just want to talk about mental health. And what made you, besides the profession that you were in, what made you interested in treating mental health related issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always known I'm very intuitive and empathetic. I always felt like I was aware as a young one that I was going to have to get a job and earn money from a very, very young age. I don't know why. My businesswoman hat was always in my field of consciousness. And I felt very intimidated by that and honestly very overwhelmed by that. The idea of having to earn money the rest of my life, especially if you're 5 and thinking about this, it seems
Wow.
quite a feat, right? But I was very aware that my skill was to honor people and help people feel supported and help people feel listened to. I was aware that I was good at that. But I used to literally cry and be you can't make money off of that. But then I was well, I guess I could be a therapist or a teacher. So I kind of looked at what I was already doing in my life, just as a little Pisces baby, as a little empathetic creature. And then went off that path, of course, once I graduated high school and even in college, I was more arts focused. And I was pretty lost though, but I was having a good time and I really knew I loved art. So then eventually I studied photography, and in my photography program, it was very, very clear that my artwork was a lot about process and not the product. And so then that dumped me naturally into art therapy. But I definitely tried to do other things and pretended that I cared less, to be honest. And I was just really not aligned with my heart, with my values. I was in spaces that I didn't quite feel comfortable, or I just didn't feel like people were taking into account maybe what I was seeing, what I was feeling, as far as not making fun of or marginalizing people because of the way that they think or the way that they experience life. And so, yeah, so then it was just, honestly, I joke, not joke, that my life path is I don't have a choice. like I have to do what I do now. I can't do anything else. And at first that felt really restricting, and I was angry at that, honestly, and I resented that because I was like, I don't want to care about people so much. Like, I just want to care about me. Like, I just want to have fun. Like, isn't this my life, you know? But then, I don't know, the healing I've done and the growing I've done over the last few years, I've just gotten into a much more peaceful, harmonious space with it, where I feel honored that this is my work, and I feel honored to see people in their depths and in their grief and whatever, in their transformation and in their beauty and bigness. And now I feel very excited and enriched and enlivened by it, but I think there was another time where I felt really drained and overwhelmed by it. So,
Wow. I mean, you made a point that like also mental health was heavily stigmatized. So it was kind of, did you ever felt hesitant to be in the mental health field?
that's a good
Like I know that
question.
you said you pretended to be something else or someone else for some time, and then it did not align with who you are.
Right. Yeah, because I was like interning on like photo studio sets,
Right.
and like something where it's like not about mental health. It's about like being skinny and like looking a certain way and presenting a certain thing, right? Which is like the opposite of mental health, or can be. So sorry, what was the question? The stigmatization of?
Yeah, the mental health was stigmatized because, like you said, therapists since I don't know when, like the actual therapist, like licensed, they have the Freudian approach, right? They're like your past, your wounds and trauma and
Right,
healing
right.
and all that. So it's in the West actually.
Very much in the West,
It's
yes.
very emphasized in the West. Like
Very
I go to
Western.
therapy, I talk about my feelings. It's very emphasized in the West, not generally in the East. So my question to you: did you ever feel that stigma, like to get into, like,
Yeah.
why am I doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I felt it externally. Like I feel fortunate where my sense of self and my like values are very loud. And again, in this way that can even be annoying, because I'll be like, I don't want to value that, or like no one else values that. Like, can I throw it away too to have fun? But when I would get down to it, like I just truly feel like that's important. And if you can't look within yourself, if you can't explore your inner landscape, your consciousness, then like what the fuck are we doing here? You know? Like we are also here to like have a good time, be heathens and like do drugs and like eat the good food. However, that's always just felt so important to me, like your inner world. But that's because, again, as a little Pisces baby, my inner world was so wild and free. Like I remember daydreaming a lot. I remember just like being kind of romanced by life and the experience of living in my little brain, like my imagination. And so I always have just felt like that's very, very important. Where I feel stigmatized is when I'm in situations or with people who, of course, don't see that as important. So then it just became about me making sure I'm surrounding myself by that. And then also being an advocate for this, like, no, being like, I know what I know. And so I know people who go to therapy aren't like fucked up. I know they're actually probably the healthiest people if you're seeking help with your mental health.
Mature.
I say that to a lot of my clients when they're like, I messed up, or why am I reacting like this? Especially when it's like triggers and comes to our trauma. And I'm like, you're reacting to something fucked up. And of course, your reaction is going to seem like big or out of the norm, but that's because what you're experiencing is not like balanced. It's not like, quote, maybe health. So I just got really, I don't want to say defensive, but I got really rooted in like what I know. And so I know that to be true. And I think social media is it's like terrible for our mental health. And also it's been really, really helpful in the access to information now that we have. There's a distortion in that information and how we receive it. But I would say overall in the West, the conversation around like getting therapy and receiving support has gotten a lot better. I would say even in the like early 90s, it was still like, ooh, you go to therapy. And now it's like, you're at brunch and everyone's like, my therapist said this. And maybe it's a little millennial or whatever, but I mean, I'm here for it. We need to be able to like talk about what's going on for us. And something else that you mentioned that I think about often is, so I'm like mixed heritage, and we need to be with people and therapists and practitioners who can support our culture, who can support like what we're experiencing and not stigmatizing it. So, I mean, I've had therapists who So my mom is Mexican, and I was very much raised by this like lineage of like respect and family and an interdependent culture. And so I would bring some of that to therapy, not directly, but indirectly by sharing about what was going on with my family or how something was unfolding. And not even a way that I was expressing it was a problem, but I would be talking about something adjacent. And the therapist, it was really interesting because initially I went to very like white, like European therapists would stigmatize it. And I didn't realize that's what was happening until I myself went to grad school for therapy and started becoming aware of like how that intersects and the kind of lenses many therapists have in that space. And I mean, that was really healing for me because it didn't sit well, of course, in session. And I've had bad therapy. My first episode of my podcast, like I talk a little bit about like the bad therapy I've received.
Oh, by the way, check out our podcast. What's our podcast called?
It's called TBCH. To be completely honest,
it's streaming on
on Spotify and Anchor.
Anchor. Yeah, I'll drop a link.
Yes, thank you.
On the video. But you were saying.
Yeah, so, I had these terrible therapeutic experiences because it was very stigmatizing of my culture and also me being between cultures anyways. I spent a lot of the first part of my life, like, just trying to adopt to one side or the other or, like, moving through spaces, just trying to be normal in, like, whatever space I was in. So internalizing that, like, wrongness, like, there's something wrong with me if, like, I feel comfortable in this familial environment that prioritizes interdependence or like really goes hard on like respecting your elders. Like that was almost like seen as like, how dare they in this way, because I was with a practitioner who wasn't open to my worldview and who wasn't, nurturing of that and wasn't curious and exploring that. And I would say that's just the marker of a good coach, therapist, counselor, whatever, is somebody who helps you be curious about yourself and not making so much meaning out of something when you share it with them, like right out the gate. Like that's a kind of a red flag.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think cultural nuances are important in therapy because, there are certain subtleties that individually you deal with that, like you said, not white Europeans are bad, but they don't get it.
No, it's just a very different way of being, different way of moving through the world.
Exactly.
Right? And so, like, how can you say the way that I move through the world is wrong and the way that you move through the world is right? Like, we cannot, right? And so that is something else I appreciate that I do think mental health is starting to gear into, but Western culture, we love right and wrong, and we love these, like, essentialist ideologies.
It's very binary.
So binary. And I do think with the conversation of mental health coming out, it's becoming more apparent that like life is just so much more nuanced than that, and what might be right in one situation, harmonious in one situation, may be the completely wrong thing in another one, or disharmonious. I try not to use super binary words like right and wrong, so you'll probably see me like correct myself or try and choose a different word like during this conversation, but I really try and kind of just root down into like something that's harmonious and something that's maybe not harmonious, creates some discord. Because also sometimes in order to transform, like we need the discord. Sometimes we need the chaos and the upset to really get to the root of a thing, to really feel motivated to transform it. So I think it's just like a lovely part of life.
No, absolutely. And what's beautiful is that therapy is now accessible through TikTok and Instagram. Like, it's not that you're going to and paying through your insurance or $200 to see a European white dude and you talk about your past. It's not that. Like, you can sit at your home and then watch videos like that's helpful for you and your mental health, which is also like I follow you on Instagram, which is, you talk about a lot on mental health and also astrology. And tell me a little bit about astrology.
Yeah, so astrology, I look at it as it's like a psychological tool, as just an oracle, a window. I was trained in art therapy, which I love because so much of like the expressive arts is all about just finding whatever mediums you're already interested in and like leveraging them for healing and leveraging them for self-reflection, for like therapeutic gain, if you will. So I love astrology as a language of symbols. I love it as doing like archetypal work of embodying characteristics that we like may not feel our own initially, or that we may have difficulty with, or owning characteristics that we may want to disown. So I use astrology just as like a soul map is kind of what I call it. And I just use it to ask my clients questions about the ways that they like to relate in the world, what makes them feel safe. Like, well, it can show, about your childhood. It can show what you're kind of looking for in a relationship. It shows your emotional landscape, it's all, of course, open to interpretation, and it's always dependent on the whole chart, you know, where it's like how the planets are talking to each other. It's not just that, like, yes, I mean, my sun is in Pisces, and that's very important, but it's also like about the other conversations everyone's having together, my planets. And I think that's that translates to, like, in psychotherapy as like parts work, or even as narrative therapy, these other schools of thought that are about what are the stories that you tell about yourself, what are the different parts of yourself that you might have that like conflict. Astrology is so helpful for that. I call it like our council of planets, or kind of like different parts of our personalities. And sometimes they have conflicting desires, and sometimes they have conflicting needs. And that's where we got a lot of distress, when we're like fighting against ourselves, right? So astrology is a great tool to look into that, to help with some acceptance around that, and to just give clues around what people might find nourishing or supportive. And also, I think your astrology chart can also show some really deep wounding that you carry through this life that feels very mysterious. So I find that helpful as well.
There's a chart?
Well, it's called your Chiron. There are a few things, like certain styles of conversations that not necessarily everybody has. They're called angles in your chart that can show some where there's some like tension and wounding. But there's this one little fucking asteroid called Chiron, and that shows us kind of, everybody has one, what it's like a psychological wound in our life that we're just going to work on forever. And it's not even that it hurts forever. It's just that it's almost like if you've had a knee injury and you still play basketball, and you just have to be mindful of this knee injury, that if you do a certain thing, you might re-aggravate it. So, you know, you wear your brace or you do your stretches. You know, it doesn't mean that thing is ruling your life, but you're making precautions around that. And so I work a lot with the Chiron and folks' chart to kind of show us that maybe what the wound, and I mean, it honestly already comes up in conversation when I'm talking to folks. And so it's just more helpful to be like, look at this thing, and like talking about it through, it gives us a little distance, right? And it makes it a little less like, this is just inside me and I'm fucked up, and a little more like, you know, you're stardust, you're like reflected in the stars, and like these are some life lessons and patterns you can work with if you want to, and you also don't have to, you know. So I'm really into, of course, also being in our agency around a thing. And so even when I'm working with people around stuff and they like really want to get to something, and then they're like, actually, I'm over it, like I feel so sick of it, I'm like, great, don't work on it this week, like stop. Because the healing industrial complex is a thing. You know, capitalism thrives off of us thinking we're fucked up, thinking that we're broken, and that we always need something else to be fixed, even if that's therapy. There's still like money to be made. So I'm a really big fan of like, put it down, like, like, you know, take a load off. There's nothing wrong with you. Of course, we all want to have maybe we don't all want to, but many of us want to have the most harmonious experience in life that we can, the most maybe fruitful. And there are just different ways that shows up at different times, but like you can just relax sometimes.
Yeah, it's demand and supply. Like, you know, if there is something wrong with you, you can buy this. We have a new, so it's just demand and supply. They have to make sure there's something wrong with you. You need something externally to fulfill the emptiness inside you. So
right. And so I often tell people, like, you know, is this really something wrong with you, or is it just something we're working on? Or is this something that you would like to shift? Does it even need to be that there's something wrong with you? And sometimes people are like, oh, and I'm like, what happens if there's nothing wrong with you? Like, then where are you? And people are like, fuck, like, I don't know. I like kind of built my life up. And I've done the same thing. You know, I love wellness. I love like consciousness expansion. And I can very easily fall into a hole of like, now I'm going to fix this. Now I'm going to fix this. But recently, especially, I've just really returned to like, life is simple. We make it harder than we need it to be. And there's nothing wrong. Like, take a nap, go on a walk, smoke a joint.
You
like,
find reasons to, you know, to assign there's something wrong with something, you know. So,
right.
so yeah.
Maybe
you know,
you're just hungry.
yeah, you're hungry for problems. You know, like,
right.
you know, people do that. Like, they're sitting on, there's no fucking issue, and they just create problems in their head.
It's because a lot of times we're more comfortable with chaos than the peace. So then sometimes then it's more like, okay, like, just what is it to be peaceful then? Like, why is that scary? You know, there's so many ways and things you can venture into, but I'm a big fan of like, go get some fried chicken, smoke a joint, just like have a nice evening, like get your blanket out. Like, it's all fine. It's all fine.
Yeah,
like, it's not that serious. Sometimes it totally is, but a lot of times it's not that serious.